Okay, greetings one and all, and welcome to this math lesson. Today we'll be looking at quadratic equations. Yes, quadratic equations. Okay, let's dive in. So if we look at this question says expand and solve the quadratic equation correct to two decimal places. Here we have the quadratic equation, 2x multiplied by x minus 6 equals 17. Well, the first thing that we must do, we must multiply 2x and x. So that's what we're going to do. Let's multiply. So we're going to multiply 2x times x, and 2x multiplied by x is going to be what? 2x squared. So 2x multiplied by x is 2x squared. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to multiply 2x and negative 6. So 2x multiplied by negative 6 is negative 12x. So basically you have the 2 multiplied by 6, and that's how we get the 12. And obviously we attach the x there. So 2x multiplied by negative 6 is negative 12x. Okay, we just bring down the 17, so that's fine. The next thing I want to do is I want to bring the 17 over the equal sign. So it was a positive 17, so now it becomes a negative 17. So we have 2x squared minus 12x minus 17 equals 0. And now we can use the quadratic formula. Now the quadratic formula says that if we have a quadratic equation expressed in this way, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, and that's why I wanted to send the 17 over so that we can have 0 on this side, so that the equation can look like, so the equation can look or can be ready for the quadratic, for the application of the quadratic. So the equation can be ready for the application of the quadratic formula. And so as we can see, a is the coefficient of x squared, b is the coefficient of x, and c is the constant, and 0 is here. And so we have this equation that is ready for the application of the quadratic formula. What is the quadratic formula? Well, the formula says that the solution to this equation is x equals to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. And so b here is the same b, right? That is the coefficient of x. A here is the same a, that's the coefficient of x squared. And c here is the same c, that is the constant. All right, so based on this equation, what is a, what is b, what is c? Well, a is the coefficient of x squared, so a is going to be 2, right? B is the coefficient of x, so b is going to be negative 12. Notice that we take the whole, notice we include the sign, so it's going to be negative 12. So b is negative 12, and c is the constant, so c is going to be 17. So a is 2, b is negative 12, and c is negative 17. So we're going to use that and plug it into, or substitute it into our formula so that we can get the answer. All right, so again, we know that a is 2, b is negative 12, c is negative 17, and we have the quadratic formula. So let's substitute. The first thing we'll substitute is b. So we know that b is negative 12. So wherever we see b, we put negative 12. So it's going to be b. So we put negative 12. Notice that the formula says negative b. So we keep the negative on the outside, but we have to put what b is, and b is actually negative 12. Plus or minus remains. And we have the square root of b squared. We know that b is negative 12. So that's negative 12 squared. Now let's substitute the a's. We know that a is, in this case, a is 2. So we're going to put 2 here, and we're also going to put 2 here. And then we know that c is negative 12, negative 17 rather. So we put negative 17 here. So b is negative 12, a is 2, and c is negative 17. Now is time to put this inside our calculator. So we're going to put negative 12 squared minus 4 times 2 times negative 17. Again, negative 12 squared minus 4 times 2 times negative 17. And so when we do that, we get 280. All right, so we put square root of 280. And notice that this says plus or minus. So that means that we have two values of x. We have one that is positive, so we have to consider where when we're looking at the positive sign. And we also have one where we consider the negative one, because x, remember the formula says plus or minus, so we have to separate them to get two values of x. All right, so one where we look solely at the positive sign and one where we look solely at the negative sign. And the subscripts that we use are the positive and the negative. Okay, so let's look at in the positive case. So what is the square root of 280? Well, the square root of 280 is approximately 16.733200053. And we just put the plus. So we have 12 plus 16.733200053. How did we get the 4? How did we get the 4? Well, we got the 4 because 2 times 2 is 4. So that's how we got that denominator. And we just carried the denominator straight through. What is 12 plus this value? Well, we're going to get 28.733 sorry, we have 28.733200053 all over 4. And so that means we're going to divide this quantity by 4. When we divide that, we get 7.183,300,133. And so that's what we have for x positive, all right? Now let's look at x negative. Well, we know that the square root of 280 is going to be 16.733,200,53. And so we have 12 minus this quantity. Remember, we have to divide all that by 4. And so when we subtract, we get negative 4.733,200,53 divided by 4. And then when we actually do division, we get negative 1.183,300,133. Now, what does this say? This said that we have to write our answer correct to 2 decimal places. And so let's round. We know that the number behind the 8. So the 8 is the number that's in the second. Is the number that's in the second decimal place. And so that means that we have to look at this number 3. 3 is less than 5. And so we cannot add 1. So it's just going to be 8. So we have 7.18. That is this number correct to 2 decimal places. And then same thing for this one. 3 is less than 5. So it's just going to be negative 1.18. And so that means that our answer is we have 2 values of x that satisfies this equation. We have x is equal to 7.18 and x is equal to negative 1.8. And those x is equal to negative 1.18. And the other one is x is equal to 7.18. And so those are the values of x that satisfies the equation. Now, in this case, we accept both values of x. There's no restriction on x. X is just a real number. So both are possible values of x which satisfy the equation. So both of these values will make this equation true. Remember, these are approximations of the true value. Like I said, these are, like the question said, we want the answer correct to 2 decimal places. So these 2 values will satisfy this equation, understanding that these are approximation of the true value or the true solution. We just approximate it, we round it. All right, let's look at the next question. We have, this one is from 2022. It says a regular plot of land in the Cool Breeze community has a width of x meters and a length of x plus 2 meters. Write an expression for the area of this plot in terms of x. It's a rectangular plot of land, so let's look at the rectangle. We know that the width of the rectangle is x. Remember, the width is the shortest side. And the length, which is the longest side, is x plus 2. What is the area? Remember, area is length times width. So we basically have to multiply these two. Multiply length times width. And we have x multiplied by what? X plus 2. And we know how. And in order to multiply them, what we have to do? We have to multiply x times what? X. What is x times x? Well, x times x is what? X squared. And then we have to multiply x times what? 2. And x times 2 is going to be what? 2x. So an expression for the area of this plot of land in terms of x is x squared plus 2x. Moving right along, we have B. B says a larger rectangular plot of land in the Sunnyside community has a length of 2x meters and a width of x minus 3 meters. Write an expression for the area of this plot in terms of x. So we have a bigger plot of land. It's still rectangular in nature. We know that the length, which is the longest side, is 2x meters. And we know that the width is x minus 3 meters. And so in order to find the area of this plot of land, obviously we have to multiply length times width. And so we have 2x multiplied by x minus 3. Again, 2x multiplied by x minus 3, we have to multiply it out. And so we have 2x multiplied by x. What is 2x multiplied by x? Well, that's going to be 2x squared. Then we have 2x multiplied by negative 3. That's going to give us negative 6x. Again, 2x multiplied by negative 3 is negative 6x, because 2 times 3 is 6. And so the expression for the area of this plot of land in terms of x is 2x squared minus 6x. Okay, what does the next part says? It says, this is C. It says the sunny side plot is 240 meters cube larger than the cool breeze plot. Write an equation to represent this information and solve it for x. Okay, again, let me read the question. It says the sunny side plot is 240 meters cube larger than the cool breeze plot. Write an equation to represent this information and solve for x. Please note that this question is supposed to say 240 meters squared. That's because we're dealing with area. We're not dealing with volume. So it's supposed to be 240 meters squared, not 240 meters cube. Nonetheless, they say write an equation to represent this information. So what they're saying is that the sunny side plot, which is the larger one, the sunny side plot is 240 meters squared larger than cool breeze plot. Write an equation to represent this information. But what that means is that if the sunny side plot is larger, is 240 meters squared larger than the cool breeze plot, that means that if I take the area of one, and that's the bigger one, right? If I take the area of the bigger one and subtract it with the area of the smaller one, I should get 240, right? That's what it means for one to be 240 meters squared larger, right? It means that if I take the area of the big one and subtract it with the area of the smaller one, I should get 240, all right? And so that's what that means. And so this equation, this expression right here is the area of the bigger plot. And this one right here is the area of the smaller plot. So what they're basically trying to say is that if you take the area of the big one and subtract it with the area of the smaller one, you should get 240. And that's what it means for sunny side to be 240 meters squared larger than the cool breeze. So just understanding how we interpret it is very important. Okay, with that in mind, since we just have to subtract these two expressions and then solve for x, did they want us to solve for x? Yes, they want us to solve for x. All right, so let's simplify it and then solve for x. The first thing we have to understand is that this entire equation, it's not equation, this entire expression is related to this negative sign. What does that mean? That means that we have to multiply the negative by both terms. All right, so that's very important. So we have negative multiplied by x squared, which is going to be negative x squared. And then we have negative multiplied by what? Positive 2x. That's going to give us negative 2x. So basically, we can look at this as being negative 1. So negative 1 multiplied by x squared is negative x squared. And negative 1 multiplied by 2x is negative 2x. The 1 is there, we just don't put it. So you can look at, if you want to think of it as 1, you can do that, but you don't have to put the 1. All right, the 1 is implied. All right, so we know that this is negative x squared minus 2x. Okay, good. What we need to do is we need to group like terms. So what does that mean? That means that this negative 2x needs to go with this negative, I'm saying negative 2x, no. This negative x squared needs to go with the 2x squared because both of them are x squared. So we have to combine these two together, all right? So both of them needs to be together, all right? We need to combine them. And then we also need to combine the x's. So 6x and 2x, negative 2x needs to be together. And so that's what we're going to do in this next step. Combine the like terms. The x squared go with the x squared, and the x's go with the x's. So let's do that. So we have negative 2x squared. Sorry, we have 2x squared minus x squared. So those two are together. And we have negative 6x minus 2x. So those two are together. Now we just bring down the equals to 240. That's fine. What is 2x minus x squared? My apologies. What is 2x squared minus x squared? Well, you can look at this as 1x squared. So basically 2 minus 1. And 2 minus 1 is simply 1. So we have 2x squared minus x squared. That's simply x squared or 1x squared. And like I said, you can look at it as basically having a coefficient of 1. Every time we don't have a coefficient in front of x squared, the coefficient is 1. So 2 minus 1 is basically 1. So 2 minus 1 is 1. So we have 2x squared minus 1x squared. And that's going to give us 2x squared minus 1x squared is 1x squared. So that's the same thing as x squared. Now, after we already do this side, let's do the 6x minus 2x. So what is negative 6x minus 2x? That's going to be negative 8x. Now we want to set this up so that we can be ready for the quadratic, for the application of the quadratic formula. So I'm going to send the 240 over the equal sign. And so now we have x squared minus 8x minus 240 equals 0. The reason why I do it is because I want to set it up for the quadratic formula. Yeah, we need to set it up for the quadratic formula. So that's why we send the 240 over. Okay, so what else do we need? Well, we know that we have to apply the formula now. And how do we apply the formula? Well, we need to figure out what is A, what is B, what is C. So remember, A is the coefficient of x squared. So in this case, the coefficient of x squared, as we know, is 1. Like I said, if you don't see a coefficient on x squared, it's 1. So A is 1. B is negative 8 because remember, B is the coefficient in front of x, right? We also know that C is 240. Why is C is negative 240? Because C is constant. And so that's how we look at it like that. So A is 1 because it's a coefficient of x squared. B is negative 8 because it's a coefficient of x. And C is negative 240. All right. Good. So we know what A is, we know what B is, we know what C is. Now let's just use the formula. So we have to substitute. We know the formula says x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. All right. So what is b? Well, b is going to be negative 8. So we put negative 8 there. What is, we also need to substitute for b here as well. So that's going to be negative 8 as well. So we have negative 8 here, and we have negative 8 here. So all the b's are covered. Now let's do the a. A is 1, so that's easy. So a is going to be right here. Wherever we see a, we put 1, and also we put 1 there. And the last one that we have to look at is going to be c. Remember, c is a negative 240. Now, all you need to do is plug in this entire thing into your calculator. So you have a negative 8x. So you have negative 8 squared minus 4 times 1 multiplied by negative 240. And once you put all of that in your calculator, you should get 1024. All right, so we have two values of x that we have to deal with. So x positive and x negative. Let's deal with x positive. We have 8 plus, right, the square root of 1024 all over 2. And so what is the square root of 1024? The answer is 32. Now we just add it. 32 plus 8 is going to be 40. And 40 divided by 2 is definitely 20. Now let's do the other one, the x negative. We know that the square root of 240 is, sorry, we know the square root of 1024 is 32. By the way, we got 2 at the bottom because 2 times 1 is 2. And we just continue with the 2's straight through and also with this side. 8 minus 32 is going to be negative 24. We divide that by 2 and we get negative 12. What does that mean? That means that the values that we have is 20, and we have x is equal to -12. So those are the values that satisfy this equation. But in real life, the actual length or width of a plot of land can never be negative. So we have to ignore the negative result. So we ignore this result, the -12, and so our answer for x is going to be +20, because we're dealing with a real life situation here with an actual literal length and width and plot of land. So those things are not negative. So we have to deal with the positive value of x, and we ignore the negative value of x. All right, so x is equal to 20. All right, awesome. The next question says the sum of the first n natural numbers is given by the formula s is equal to n multiplied by n plus 1 all over 2. Use this formula to calculate the sum of the first 50 natural numbers. So if we're trying to find the sum of the first 50 natural numbers, all we have to do is inside of this equation, wherever we see n, we put 50. All right. So again, wherever we see n, we put 50. 50 is here, 50 is there. And so we have 50, 50 plus 1 all over 2. Good. Now, what is 50 plus 1? Well, 50 plus 1 is 51 all over 2. So we have 50 times 50. We have 50 times 51 all over 2. Now, what is 50 times 51? 50 times 51 is 2,550, and we have to divide that by 2. When we divide that by 2, we get 1,275. And so that means that the sum of the first 50 natural numbers is actually 1,275. It's a very nice formula because instead of adding all of the first 50 natural numbers, you can just use this formula and get the sum. So that's adding up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Adding all of them up, all the way up to 50, and you should get 1,275. That's what this is saying. Okay, so the formula now says, the question now says, use this formula, the formula above, to find out the amount of natural numbers that add up to 210. So what they're basically saying is that you have your formula, s is equal to n, open bracket, n plus 1 all over 2. And they're going to give us s. They're going to give us the sum. And so they say that the sum is 210. And our goal is to find out, okay, what is n? So we have to solve for n. So let's switch this around. Let's switch the equation around. And so instead of putting 210 on the left-hand side, I want it on the right-hand side. Just for familiarity, just for the sake of familiarity. All right, good. So we just switch it. We didn't, nothing is nothing is wrong with this. We just switched the sides. All right, now what we have to do is we have to multiply. What do we mean by multiply? Well, I wonder what I do next. Okay, good. Yes, I did multiply. So we have to multiply n times n is going to be what? N squared. And then we have n times 1, which is just n. Let me repeat that. N times n is n squared, and then n times 1 is n. All right. All over 2 equals to 210. So we have n squared plus n all over 2 is equal to 210. We can cross multiply, but let's put 210 over 1 first. And by the way, all we did was put 210 over 1. That's all we did. And we just kept this side, the same side, the same. Why would we put it over 1? Because we want to cross multiply. So 2 is going to be multiplied by 210, and 1 is going to be multiplied by n squared plus n. So what is 2 times 210? Well, that's 420. And what is 1 times n squared plus n? Well, it's the same thing because 1 times anything is itself. So 1 times n squared plus n is n squared plus n. And so now we have a quadratic equation because we have the highest power of our variable is 2. We have to make it look like a quadratic equation that's ready for the application of the quadratic formula. So let's send this over. So if we send the 420 over, what do we have? We have n squared plus n minus 420 equals 0. That's fine. Now we are ready to use what? The quadratic formula. All right, notice that we have a different variable. It's n. but it's the quadratic formula. We still could use it for any variable, even though the variable is n, and this is x, it's still gonna work. So in this case, a is going to be the coefficient of n, and in this case, sorry, a is going to be the coefficient of n squared. So remember, in the regular quadratic formula, a is the coefficient of x squared, but obviously we changed the variable. So the coefficient of n squared in this case is 1, all right? The coefficient is 1. The coefficient of n is also 1, so that means that b is 1. So b is 1, a is 1, and then obviously the constant is 420, negative 420. And so we have all our numbers. We have a is 1, b is 1, and c is negative 420. So that means we are ready to use the quadratic formula. What does the quadratic formula say? Well, it says that x is equal to negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. But remember, we're using n, so it's going to change to n. What is b? B is 1, so we just plug in 1 and 1. What is a? A is 1, so 1 here, 1 there, and negative 420 is c. So that's fine. Now we're going to take 1 squared minus 4 times 1 minus, we're going to say 4 times 1 times negative 420. And so if we put all of that in the calculator, we'll get 1,681. So now we have n is equal to negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 1,681. And we know that 2 times 1 is 2. So 2 at the bottom remains. Let's split these into 2. So we have positive n and we have negative n. Let's deal with the positive first. So we have negative 1 plus the square root of 1,681 all over 2. So we have the square root of 1,681 is actually 41. And so we have negative 41. Sorry, we have negative 1 plus 41. And what is negative 1 plus 41? That's going to be what? 40. All right. And so we have 40 divided by 2. And what is 40 divided by 2? Well, 40 divided by 2 is definitely 20. All right, perfect. Now we're going to do n negative. What is n negative? Well, that's negative 1 minus. So we take in the negative sign. Negative 1 minus the square root of 1,681 all over 2. So what are we going to do in this case? Well, we have to do the square root of 1,681, and that's negative 41. And then we have negative 1 minus 41, which is going to be negative 42 all over 2. All right. And so negative 42 divided by 2 is going to be negative 21. And so that means that the values of n that satisfy this equation is going to be 20, and it's going to be negative 21. However, notice that n is 20. Why is n is 20? Because n is a natural number, and so that means it must be positive. You see what I say? Natural number. So it must be positive. So we have to ignore the negative result. So that answer here is 20. So the amount of natural numbers that add up to 210 is going to be 20. So the first 20 natural numbers, if you add them up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. If you add all them up, you're going to get 210. All right, let's move on to the next question. Here it says, solve the following quadratic equation, giving your answers correct to 1 decimal place. And so what we have here is a quadratic equation. W squared plus 3w minus 8 equals to 0. See, look at that. They changed the letters. So they might use n, they might use x, they might use w, but it's still a quadratic equation, and we still could use the quadratic formula. This is very nice because we don't have to do any switching up, we don't have to do any carrying over, we don't do any manipulation. All we have to do is just use the quadratic formula. It's ripe and ready for the quadratic formula. We know what the quadratic formula says. All we need to do is figure out what is a, what is b, what is c. We know that a is the coefficient of x squared, but in this case, it's w squared. So a is going to be 1. We know that b is the coefficient of w, so b is 3. And we know that c is going to be the constant. So a is 1, B is 3, and C is going to be -8. And so now we're ready to use the quadratic formula. In this case, I don't know why I have X. It's not supposed to be X. That's a mistake. It's actually supposed to be W. So this needs to be W. All right. W. So what the first thing we have to do, we have to substitute for B. B is what? B is 3 and B is 3. So wherever you see B, you put 3. So put 3 there and also put 3 there. So we have -3 and we have 3 squared. Now, A is 1. So that means that we're going to put 1 here and we're going to put 1 here as well. So wherever you see A, you put 1. All right. Now, what else? We need C. C is -8. And so that means that you're going to put -8 right there. So what we have to do at this point is we have to deal with the inside. So you have to deal with the inside of the square root. 3 squared minus 4 times 1 times -8 is going to be 41. So we have -3 plus or minus the square root of 41 all over 2. Remember, it's supposed to be a W, so let's change that. It's supposed to be a W. So W is equal to that. Now let's deal with W positive. Again, this is supposed to be W. So this is W positive. What is W positive? Well, W positive is going to be -3 plus the square root of 41 all over 2. And then W negative, again, it's supposed to be W, because remember our variable is W. It's going to be -3 minus the square root of 41. So in this case, we choose the positive for that one. And in this case, we choose the negative. Remember, it is or, plus or minus. So let's look at the positive side of things. So what do we have? Well, W plus is going to be equal to -3 plus the square root of 41 is 6.403, 124, 237 all over 2. And then when we add -3 plus this quantity, we get 3.403, 124, 237 all over 2. And then when we divide that, we get 1.4, we get 1.701562119. Now they did say write our answer correct to 1 decimal place. And so that means that our answer correct to 1 decimal place, it needs to be 1.7. Why? Because if we look at the number that is behind 7, it's 0. 0 is less than 5. So we don't round up. We just leave it. So W positive is equal to 1.7. And this is correct to 1 decimal place. Now let's look at W negative. So we do the same thing. The square root of 41 is 6.403, 124, 237. And we have -3 minus this entity all over 2. All right. Again, it's still W negative. Okay, so what do we do at this point? Well, what we need to do is we need to minus -3 and this quantity here. And we get -9.403, 124, 237 all over 2. Again, this is still W negative. And then what we're going to do here is we're going to divide. So this entity, -9.40 and continuing all over 2 is going to be -4.701562119. And if we round it, or if we round it, or if we express this number correct to 1 decimal place, it is still going to be -4.7, just like this one, because 0 is less than 5. So it's -4.7. So that means that the answer is going to be 1.7 and -4.7, and that is correct to 1 decimal place. Notice that we accept both values of W. Reason is because, and by the way, it's supposed to be W, so W is equal to 1.7 and W is equal to negative 4.7. We accept both values of W, Y, because we don't have no restriction on what W can be. W is just a regular real number. And both are possible values of W that satisfy the equation. All right, so 1.7 and negative 4.7 is the correct answer. Obviously expressed correct to 1 decimal place. All right, let's move on to question 2017. Here we have two triangles, and what's important to note is that they say triangle ABC and DEF are similar. And so when we're looking at similar triangles, there are some important properties that come into play with similar triangles. All right, we have that AB, right, is 3x minus 6. We have that AC is 16. We have DE is equal to 15 and DF is equal to X, all right? And they say write down an equation of X representing the relationship between the corresponding sides, all right? So here we have to look at what does it mean for two triangles to be similar, because that's very important. Similar triangles, well, similar triangles doesn't mean that they are the same size, right? But it means that they are the same shape. For similar triangles, corresponding angles are equal, right? So all these angles here, corresponding angles are going to be equal. So Z is equal to Z, Y is equal to Y, and X is equal to X. So corresponding angles are equal. And then corresponding sides are in the same ratio. This is going to be very important for us as we look at it. So let's look at what that means. So if we look at this side, right? This side, which is B, all right? B is corresponding to which side? It's corresponding to Q, all right? So the ratio of these two sides, BQ, right? This ratio, all right, must be equal, right, to the ratio of the corresponding sides, another corresponding side. So let's look at this side, A, right? And look at P, right? Those two sides are corresponding sides, right? So that means that the ratio of these two sides is going to be equal to the ratio of what? B over Q. So the ratio of these two sides is equal to the ratio of the other two sides, which are corresponding to each other. And the same thing will be with the other corresponding side. So C, right? This side C. C, I mean, made that better than that. We know side C. C, the same C, right? C, let me use a different color. So we know that side C right here, this side C, its corresponding side is going to be what? It's going to be R. So when we put that in a ratio, right, CR, that ratio, right, must be equal to the ratio of B and Q, all right, because B and Q are corresponding sides. And that must also be equal to the ratio of A and P, which are also corresponding sides. So basically, corresponding sides are in the same ratio. So let's do it for this one. What are corresponding sides? Well, we know that DF, right? DF and what? AC are corresponding sides. So that means that X and what? 16, right? X and what? X and 16 are corresponding sides. So it's supposed to be okay. So I realized that in explaining this, I realized that I actually have the wrong equation, because if you look at it, I have X over 15, which is not how it's supposed to work. So I made a new slide to explain it the correct way. So let's do it right. So remember, the equation says that corresponding sides, the ratio of corresponding sides must be equal to the ratio of corresponding sides. So we know that X and 16 is supposed to be 16. We know that X and 16, these two are corresponding sides. So x, right, and 16 are corresponding sides. So their ratio, that ratio, x over 16, must be equal to this ratio of what? 15, right? 15 and 3x minus 6. So this ratio, the ratio of these two sides, must be equal to the ratio of these two sides. And also the mean for two triangles to be similar. All right, so just make a note of that. All right, so again, the ratio of these two sides, x and 16, that ratio is equal to the ratio of these two sides, 15 and 3x minus 6. All right, so that's the equation. Write down the equation in terms of x representing the relationship between the corresponding sides. Well, corresponding sides in the same ratio. So corresponding sides, once we put them in a ratio and we put another corresponding sides in the same ratio, they should be equal to each other based on the property of similarity. Now that we have the equation, the next step is to obviously solve it. But before they actually want us to solve it, they actually want us to simplify the equation first. So the equation that we have is x over 16, just like this, x over 16 corresponding sides. We put them in a ratio, and then 15 over 3x minus 6. So 15 over 3x minus 6, we put them in a ratio, and these two ratios must be equal to each other based on the property of similarity, right? And what can we do? Well, a good thing we could do here is definitely cross multiply. So we have 16 times 15 multiplied by what? X times 3x minus 6. So let's multiply them. So 16 times 15 is right here. And then x times 3x minus 6 is on this side. What we're going to do is we're going to multiply x times 3x, and that should give us 3x squared. Again, x times 3x is 3x squared. And then obviously x times negative 6 is negative 6x. All right, so that's how we get that. And what is 16 times 15? Well, 16 times 15 is definitely 240. All right, so we have 240. Now, what we need to do is we need to represent this in a way so that it can be ripe for the quadratic formula. So we send the 240 over. When we send the 240 over, it was positive 240, it becomes a negative 240. So we have 3x squared minus 6x minus 240 equals 0. Remember, we're trying to get this equation to look like this. It's very close because we have the 0 and everything else on the other side. But the only thing that we need to do is we need the coefficient here to be 1. Currently, we have 3, all right, and we don't want that. So a good thing to do is to divide everything by 3 because we want the coefficient of x to be 1. So let's divide every single term by 3. So we know that 3 divided by 3 is going to be obviously 1x squared. And then 6 divided by 3 is 2. And then 240 divided by 3 is 80. And so that means that we were, and obviously 0, and also obviously 0 divided by 3 is 0. And so now we have x squared minus 2x minus 80 equals to 0, exactly what we wanted. And we see that it simplifies to the thing that we wanted as well. All right, let's move on to actually solve this equation to determine the length of df. We already have it inside a form that is ready, that is ripe and ready for the application of the quadratic formula. Let's remind ourselves about the quadratic formula. Now we're dealing with x's and not w's and n's, so it's good. What is a? A is the coefficient of x squared. We know that the coefficient of x squared in this case is definitely 1, all right? Since no coefficient is explicitly given. So a is 1, right? We know that b is negative 2, right? B is negative 2. So b is negative 2 right there. And we also know that c is negative 80. So c is going to be negative 80 right there. So a is 1, b is negative 2, and c is negative 80. All right? So what that means is that we can use the quadratic formula, just plug and chug, substitute the values that we have for a, b, and c. So what is b? Well, b is negative 2, so we put negative 2 there. We put negative 2 there. What is a? Well, a is 1, so we put 1 there, and we put 1 there, and C is negative 80. So we put that right there. Okay, and so that's what we have for that. Now what we're gonna do is we have to now multiply and basically evaluate this expression underneath the radical. So negative squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 80. If we put that inside the calculator, we get 324. So we have 2 plus or minus the square root of 324 all over 2, because 2 times 1 is definitely 2. X can be two values, positive or negative, in terms of when it comes to using the plus sign and the negative sign. So we have X positive and obviously we have X negative. So let's use the positive version first, the plus sign. What's the square root of 324? Well, the square root of 324 is going to be 18. And so now we have x positive, which is equal to 2 plus 18 all over 2. And 18 plus 2 is 20. So we have 20 divided by 2, which is going to be 10. So x positive is 10, which is nice round number. Now we have to look at the negative side. So we have 2 minus the square root of 324 all over 2. We know the square root of 324 is 18. So we have 2 minus 18 all over 2. What is 2 minus 18? Well, 2 minus 18 is negative 16. So negative 16 divided by 2 is definitely negative 8. And so x positive is 10 and x negative is going to be negative 8. So that means that the answer is definitely going to be 10. The length df, so it's the length that we're talking about, right? The length of a triangle, right? So the length df cannot be negative since it's an actual measurement of a side of a triangle. Thus, we ignore the negative result. So we're going to ignore negative 8 because, well, df is an actual length of a triangle. That cannot be negative because it's an actual length, actual measurement that we have an actual distance in real life. So we have to consider only the positive value for this one because of the context of the situation that we're talking about. All right, let's move on to the next question. We have this one. It says, at a meeting, everyone shakes hands with each other. The formula for the total number of handshakes H made by n people is H is equal to n, open bracket, n minus 1, all over 2. Use the formula to A, find the number of handshakes at a meeting of 15 people. So what they're basically asking us to do is to take this formula, n, right? N, open bracket, n minus 1, all over 2. And wherever we see n, we have to put what? 15. So it's going to be 15 here, 15 there. So we have 15, open bracket, 15 minus 1, all over 2. What is 15 minus 1? 15 minus 1 is definitely going to be 14. And so 15 times 14 is definitely 210. We divide that by 2 and we get 105. All right. So the answer is definitely 105. So we substitute for the n, right there, 15. Actually, these two are saying the same thing. So you don't have to write it twice. But basically, the idea is plug in the 15, substitute the 15, multiply 15 by 14, you get 210. Divide it by 2 and you get 105. Number 2, sorry, not number 2, B. It says the number of people, find out the number of people when there are 210 handshakes. So basically, all this is saying is that this is actually supposed to be S. This is actually supposed to be H, not S. So I need to correct that. So let me correct that. This is supposed to be H, not S. One moment, let me make a correction to that. It's actually supposed to be H because it is the number of handshakes. So let's use H, capital H for that. So H instead of S. So let's do it again. So we have H is equal to n, open bracket, n minus 1 all over 2. And so what they're basically saying is that in this case, you know that H is equal to 210. All right. So you know that the total number of handshakes is 210. So you know the capital H is 210. So since you know the capital H is 210, substitute it. And using that understanding, solve for small n. That's basically what they asked us for. In the previous case, we had to We were given n and we had to solve for h. In this case, we are given h and we have to solve for n. That's the difference. All right, all I did here was I switched to 210. I just switched the equation, right? So I put the 210 on this side. I put the 210 on this side, and I put the other side here. I just switch it. Next, what I'm gonna do is multiply. So we have n times n, which is going to be n squared. And then we have n times 1, which is simply n. All right, so n times 1 is just n. And again, n times n is n squared, and n times 1 is just n. So we have n squared minus n all over 2 equals to 210. Okay. Now, the idea here is that what we have to do is we have to just put it over 1, put 210 over 1, and then cross multiply. And so when we cross multiply, we have 2 times 210, and we have 1 times n squared minus n. By the way, this is very similar to one question that we had before with finding the sum of the first n natural numbers. Very similar question. The only difference is that we have a negative in the inside instead of a positive. So we have 1 times n squared minus n, which is going to be n squared minus n. And we have 2 times 210, which is 420. Okay, now what we have to do is we have to basically represent it such that it's ready for the application of a quadratic formula. So we send the 420 over the equal sign. And so we are left with n squared minus n minus 420 equals 0. What does the quadratic formula say? Well, the quadratic formula says that we can find the solution that satisfies, in general, a quadratic equation if we use this formula. And so even though it's n and not x, we still could apply this formula once we know what a, b, and c is. So a in this case is going to be positive 1, and because we have 1 here, so that's positive 1. The coefficient of n squared. And then b is obviously going to be negative 1 because it's going to be the coefficient of 1. Sorry, the coefficient of n. So that's negative 1. So b is negative 1. And then c is going to be the constant, which is negative 420. So the answer here is negative 420. Okay, awesome. So now that we know what A is, B is, and C is, we can definitely use our values to use our quadratic equation rather to solve this equation, to solve the formula. Remember, we already know that A is what? A is 1. We already know that B, what is B? B is negative 1. We already know that C, what is C? C is negative 420. So we know those values. And seeing that we know those values, we can use that to basically solve the equation. So we already did that. That was the previous slide. Again, we have that A is 1, B is negative 1, and C is, this is not supposed to be like this because I have positive and not supposed to be positive, supposed to be negative. So let's fix that. So we need to change all them to negatives. So let's change all them to negatives. So let me do that. So this is supposed to be negative. It's supposed to be negative. It's also supposed to be negative because remember it's a negative 1. It's supposed to be negative as well. It's also supposed to be negative. This is negative, what we did on the last slide. And this is also supposed to be negative as well. So that means that A is 1, B is negative 1, and C is negative 420. So let me repeat that step just so we can be on the same page. So as we know, we keep the negative instead of the positive, and we multiply n times n squared minus n all over 2. We did that. We cross multiply, we get n squared minus n. We send the 420 over. Good. And we get that A is equal to 1, B is equal to negative 1, and C is equal to 420. Okay, good. So we're good. So now we can use the quadratic formula. Like I said, we're using n instead of x. Here we know that B is equal to negative 1. And so wherever we see B, we're going to put negative 1. So B is negative 1. B is negative 1. What happened to A? Well, A is 1, so A is positive 1, so it's A right there. And this is A also right here. We also know that C is equal to negative 420. So we put the negative 420 right there. All right, awesome. So let's move forward. What do we know? We know that we have to evaluate the inside of this expression. So negative 1 squared minus 4 times 1 minus 420 is going to be equal to what? 1,681. And so we know that n is equal to 1 plus or minus the square root of 1,681 all over 2, because 2 times 1 is definitely 2. We have two values of n that we can find. One where we use the positive sign and one where we use the negative sign. So let us look at the one that we use the positive sign first. So 1 plus the square root of 1,681 all over 2. We know that the square root of 1,681 is 41. I'm just going to add them. So we have that 1 plus the square root of, 1 plus 41 is going to be 42 all over 2. So the positive and positive is going to be 21. Again, the square root of 1,681 is definitely 41. We add that to 1 and we get 42. 42 divided by 2 is 21. Now let's look at when we have n negative. So we're dealing with the negative sign. We know that the square root of 1,681 is 41. And we have 1 minus 41 all over 2. And we have negative 40 divided by 2, because 1 minus 41 is negative 40. So we have negative 40 divided by 2, which is going to give us a negative 20. And so we have two possible values that can work for this equation. N equals to